Ukraine's spiderweb attack was its biggest and most successful strike on Russia so far, reportedly dealing around $7 billion worth of damage and devastating a large part of the Russian bomber fleet. Russia is still reeling from the impact of that attack, but Ukraine isn't stopping there. It's keeping the pressure up and not giving the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, a single second of respite. In fact, the Ukrainian armed forces just launched another devastating drone strike that some are calling Spiderweb 2.0, and Russian analysts are terrified of what might come next. Here's how the most recent attack unfolded. On Saturday, June 7, a Russian locomotive was speeding along the tracks, transporting an array of tanks, armored vehicles, and other military equipment. Russia relies massively on these trains to fuel and maintain its war effort. The country has even constructed multiple new railway lines since the invasion began to speed up and streamline the flow of supplies like ammo, fuel, and food. But this train was never going to reach its destination. Unknown to the Russians, Ukrainian forces had secretly hidden a small army of drones inside some of the railway containers. When the time was right, as the train was still moving, hatches on those containers opened up and the drones burst into life, flying out and raining down fire on the train. It was in many ways a mirror image of the spiderweb attack, which saw drones hidden on board a series of trucks which were then driven to key locations across Russia. Once the drones had parked up near the important Russian airfields, the container roofs opened up. Dozens of drones then filled the skies, damaging and destroying large numbers of Russian bombers that were parked up on the airfields. According to reports, up to a third of Russia's entire bomber fleet was wiped out, all in a single day, though the operation itself required a whopping 18 months of planning. Now, there's no information on how Ukraine managed to sneak its drones on board a Russian train, but it was surely a feat of incredible intelligence, strategy, and stealth. Since these trains are so important to Russia, they tend to be heavily protected, with Russian forces going to great lengths to safeguard their supplies as they move from place to place, with the likes of cameras, guards, and various technologies employed in key locations like ports, stations, and bases. So the fact that Ukraine pulled this off is quite extraordinary, and it's even more impressive to learn that Ukraine must have somehow discovered the existence of a train that was set to carry both military hardware and grain containers, and to then way to release them at just the right moment for a successful and devastating strike. In short, just like Operation Spiderweb, this attack was an astonishing example of Ukrainian ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. While there aren't yet many details about how the attack was planned and carried out, it's been confirmed by sources on both sides of the divide, and if reports are to be believed, it was an incredibly destructive and successful strike. The defense forces of southern Ukraine, for example, posted about the attack on Telegram on June 7 as part of their daily updates on key events from the front lines. They wrote, "The defense forces of southern Ukraine hit a locomotive with a column of enemy equipment. The enemy's losses amounted to 13 tanks and more than 100 units of armored and automotive equipment." On X, the American independent war reporter Igor Shushko appeared to confirm the news, writing, "Ukrainian drones flew out of grain train car hatches and destroyed 13 Russian tanks and more than 100 armored vehicles and other equipment being transported by the Russian train in occupied southern Ukraine. The hatches appear to have been opened remotely again." Other news sources paint an even grimmer picture for Russia, suggesting that, as well as more than a dozen tanks and over 100 armored vehicles, the drone strike also took out 7 artillery systems and 10 fuel tanks, carrying anywhere from 158,000 to 172,000 gallons of fuel. Of course, there's always the possibility that Ukraine's armed forces and other sources are exaggerating these claims somewhat to make the attack appear even more successful. However, even reports from the Russian side of the war paint a damning picture of the attack, with one pro-Kremlin blogger in particular expressing absolute outrage that the attack was allowed to take place. He alleged